everyone. Welcome back to this data science bootcamp. All right, guys. So this is a no fluff bootcamp. Instead of giving you guys theory, you guys are about to see me actually put together a real project. Now, what you guys are looking at right now is a whiteboard that you guys can get access to. It's a Zoom whiteboard. Now, in the real world, when you guys get a project, it's probably going to be some half-baked project of like an idea of like what either the department or the client wants to bring to life. You'll have different pieces to the puzzle, and you'll need to work with different stakeholders to map out, what exactly they're trying to put together and how exactly we're going to do it. So this is actually going to give you real practice. I'm actually going to be mapping this out like in real time. And like I said, I've spent over a decade in this field. This is how I spend the majority of my time. So rather than give you guys theory, you guys are going to get a real project to see in like the data department, like what we'll actually be like working on. Right now, I'm kind of playing the role of a data product manager. Um, and depending on what company you work for, like the bigger the company, the more specialized your role. So the different things you'll see me do, sometimes this will be something that specifically like the data scientist will do, or like the data engineer will do, or the data analyst will do, or the business intelligence developer might do. So just depending on how big the company is that you work for, like the more specialized, the smaller the company, the more hats you're going to wear. All right. So first things first, if you guys have not already, go take a look at the last video to see how the actual app is, like the different wireframes of what the views are going to be. What I want to get into right now that I'm going to zoom into is just like an overview of how this is all supposed to work. All right. So what you guys see, let me just zoom in for a bit. All right, let's just kind of like go through high level what we're looking at here. So what I did first, and I would highly recommend this, is I like to just like map out all the information that we have. The first thing that I did was just kind of start with this whiteboard in Canva that I will share in a future video to just like kind of like iron out like who the actors are, like what are we trying to do, what are the different like applications and things like that. So I pretty much like put all that information on a whiteboard. And then what I did was like divide up into folders the different processes that we'll need to go through. So I have a folder that's strictly for like front end views, a folder that's strictly for the back end models, a folder that is just for like the different inputs, etc. So like just like dividing up how like the application needs to work. All right. So let's just go through for a second um how this is all supposed to work. All right. So the first part of the app that we're going to work on building out is going to be the business intelligence dashboard, right? So this is going to tell the clients at a snapshot, essentially like, the performance of like the funding goal performance. Okay. So let's just take a step back and just think about like how this is supposed to work. All right. So what we have on the left-hand side is the end result, right? So this visualization of our efforts. This is essentially like this entire process simplified and like a visual. Okay. So basically the client will have established some sort of KPIs, which we'll go through, right? You would have worked with the client to establish like business requirements. And then from there, we would have established KPIs, right? From those KPIs, we would have developed some sort of like dashboard. So let's just assume that we went ahead and worked with the UX team, we worked with the data team, and we came up with this UX design of what the dashboard is supposed to look like. All right. So what we know right now is that on this dashboard, there are different charts. and these charts are pulling different data. All right. So what we need to figure out now is how do we first gather this information, so extract, right? So basically what I'm describing is the ETL process. ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. All right. So how do we extract the information needed to make this process, to make this dashboard come to life? How do we transform the data, and how do we load the data to this dashboard, so that this dashboard actually comes to life? All right. So whether you are using Plotly, whether you are using Tableau, whether you're using Power BI, there's some process in the background to gather, transform, and load this data to these BI dashboard to gather this insight. All right. So what we're about to do right now is take a step back and just add an overview, like understand pretty much like how this process is going to work. And then in the next video, we'll go more into the actual KPIs and like map out the models that the models that we need to get those different views, and then where we'll actually get that information from. So let me scroll out for a second. Okay, so this is like a good place to start when you're trying to like understand how the app should work so that you can map out the different requirements. So what I have over here is the end result, right? So what you guys see is something a visual API and an ETL API. Now, in my data science bootcamp that you guys can join, I will go into great details about what an API is and why you should use it. To keep it simple, right here, it's best practice, right? You don't, because a lot of different applications might need to use your data, you really want an API to be like this central source that controls different applications interacting with your data. There's a multitude of reasons why you would want to do that, and I go into detail in my data science bootcamp. So if you guys want a deep explanation, just make sure you guys join the bootcamp on June the 1st. Right now, just assume that you know that that's best practice, all right? So let's say that there's some API that is specifically responsible for visualizing. So controlling all the different processes that allows us to visualize the information in the database. All right, so before we can even get there though, there's this process, the ETL process, where we gather the information required, we transform that information, and then we load that information to our database. All right. So let's say we had an ETL API, for example. All right. So what will happen is we will gather information. Let me just scroll down a little bit. And we'll go through this like in the next video during like the actual like data transformation process. But what you guys will see is, for example, our role participant Zandra is passing us different information that we'll need in order to get to our final result, which is, for example, this business intelligence dashboard, right? I'll give you guys one example. So for example, there's a card on our dashboard that has our total funding goal, right? So this process is figuring out, or this process is responsible for going to the data source that stores that information and properly rendering that information out to our BI solution so that we get the information as a card. All right. So let's go back over here. So we know that a part of the process is that our participant is going to give Lemon Squeeze marketing background information, right? Because their ultimate goal is to take all of their information and transform it to like clear, these are all the different classifications that this participant falls in so that they can more effectively identify funding opportunities for them. So this phase is pretty much like ground zero. So what you guys will see, let me see if I scroll out a bit, is there's a process over here. Where do you see? Okay. So over here, right? So here's a screenshot. So for example, Zandra has emailed over to Lemon Squeeze Marketing different information. So the program that she's going to attend, about the art residency, some of the funding opportunities, some of the classifications that she falls into. Also, she has information about her goals. There is a classified document that refers to her military background that we won't show in this exercise. We just simply have a little card there that says military, classified military document. We also have her art resume, right? So this is a very common challenge we have in the data department, right? So we have data coming in several different formats, right? So we have the email that's just like plain text. We have some documents that's in PDF form. We have another document that's in PDF form. And this is raw data, and it's not in any particular structured format. And our ultimate goal is to transform and then a Google form, right? So then the other data source is Zandra has filled out this Google form that has information that we need. Okay. And then our goal is to take this information and zoom out for a bit. And so we're going to take all this different information from these data sources, right? And our ultimate goal is to transform that data so that our participant is put in different classifications, right? So in our walkthrough, we saw an example of the different classifications that Zandra falls into. For example, there's an occupation classification. There's a military status classification, there's a gender classification, right? So our ultimate goal is to take all of that data, ingest all of that data, and then transform that and put our participant in different classifications. All right. Another challenge that we have, right, is going to be gathering all like the different funding opportunities. So scraping the web, reaching out to different funding organizations, but creating a database of funding opportunities. And we also need to transform the format of our funding opportunities. More specifically, the funding opportunity also needs to have classifications. And the ultimate goal, the power of this app is supposed to be that they match up very well the participant classifications and the funding classifications to recommend the best possible funding opportunities for the participants and more easily automate the process of applying for those grants. All right. So that's what our ultimate goal is as far as like the process. So this is like where the magic is supposed to happen, right? We will work with our engineer to like actually go through like the how we get there, but that's what should happen, right? So that's one transformation. One of the transformations is taking the user's inputs and transforming it into this like new format that just easily classifies, that puts the user, the participant in different classifications. And then it also just identifies funding opportunities that this participant is eligible for, all right? So that's one of the first big deliverables that we need to figure out. So we'll need to work with different stakeholders to make that happen. But the first step is just to like understand like what needs to happen. All right. So that's the first part of the process. Now let's move on to the next part. So outside of just providing being able to like identify and match up the funding opportunities for the participants, we also need a way to like visualize our efforts and visualize like a way to update the information. So that's where we have our dashboards and our KPIs and our data and our database tables and our SQL queries. So essentially, this is how this works, right? So let's go back up for a second to this dashboard because this does a good job of explaining this part. Okay, so let's scroll into this for a second. So no matter what business intelligence solution you're using, essentially what happens is your data, right, that we just talked about, that raw data goes through an ETL process, and it's going to be stored in a structured database. Now, in our case, we're going to also have a non-structured database to store like the raw data before it's really transformed. But for our use case, like the ultimate, like the final format is it's still going to be in a structured database, right? So this information is going to be in some sort of structured database. It's probably going to be in a data warehouse, right? And what's going to happen is that information is going to get pulled from the API and it's going to get transformed using some queries. All right. So this is if you're a part of the data team, especially if you're the data analyst or business intelligence developer, this is like where like you will definitely like lead the charge. So taking the business use case and then transforming that into technical requirements and creating queries that will actually answer that question. So for example, let's look at one of our cards that's not so obvious. One of the things that like one of the cards that we need to fill in is the potential funding identified and also the percentage of our goal reached, right? So we'll have different tables that store different information about our participant in the application. And we have to create queries that will allow us to actually pull that information together so that we can feed that to our presentation layer. That's what it's usually called, the presentation layer. All right. So again, the information that we gather is going to be stored in some database. Some of the information is going to be SQL, and then some is going to be NoSQL, and then you're going to have some queries, and the API is going to feed those results to your presentation layer, and then you'll actually have the information required to feed this database. All right. So that's the workflow at a high level of like pretty much like how this is going to work. All right. So the participant is going to give us some information. Our ETL API is going to extract, transform, and load that information to our different databases. Then our visual API is going to take our the information in our database and it's going to create queries and views that's going to feed our presentation layer. And then our presentation layer is finally going to be what like renders out the visual that we talked about before. So this is where we're going to see like the dashboard performance, as well as like even being able to see the different admin views. All right. Is there anything else I wanted to share in this particular tutorial? All right, guys, that's pretty much all I wanted to share as far as like the high level of how it works. In the next part of this tutorial, I'm actually going to go into how we're going to like ingest. So I'm going to go more into detail about this section here. So we'll actually go through the data ingestion process and then talk through like how or walk through how like which like data which tables this information is going to be stored, and then we'll actually work on the queries. So for my data people, in the next few exercises you'll actually get hands-on experience being able to practice creating queries. All right. Because we'll need to create the database that we're going to store this information in, and then we'll also need to start creating the queries required to feed out our database. All right. So make sure you guys stay tuned for this next video. Check out the next tutorial. We'll actually be going through the data ETL and data mapping in the next tutorial. All right. So we'll actually go through the information that Zandra has passed to us. And we'll also like walk through how we'll store this in the database, how we'll create queries, and how ultimately this is going to feed our presentation layer. All right. So I will see you guys in the next tutorial. Peace.